we've frozen our stories in time.
Yeah.
And this is the only group that did an anthology, 100% of just their group. That did that.
Cool.
So I
So
see
they're
those
here.
colors
Sorry,
there,
yeah, the
and it
colors,
reminds me
and they're
of
there,
the,
yeah.
the colors
But isn't
there.
that wonderful?
But thank you so much.
well.
Oh my goodness, don't worry about my being able to speak. You've been
I
able
can
to
read.
write,
I can
you've
read.
been able to write it down, and
I'm a
there
good
you are.
reader.
And Karen, the words that you share from your heart mean so much to
yes.
me. That although transformative life writing is not counseling or therapy, it's very therapeutic if we go to the place that our writing is coming from.
Yes.
And for me, that's one of the surprises, that when it came to me through me, for me, but not from me. And so I still am surprised by what happens when I sit down and I name it and claim it and tame it, reframe it. I did that. I wrote those words on a page 2 days ago when I was visited by my own destroyer, is the word that you used. And I wrote those words down and thought, if I can write 2 sentences to name this experience that I'm having, to claim it, to tame it, to reframe it, and to proclaim something new, I can get through this.
Absolutely.
And it helped me so much that day. It was like having a counselor sitting beside me, just saying, here's what to do. And so I use the tools with gratitude myself. And the stories that people share almost always have some piece of, for me, in your story, in your story, in your story. It's like, oh.
And Karen, you always amaze me because you come out with such wisdom. She does. I remember those times we would sit around the table and you'd be very quiet, and then all of a sudden this wonderful piece of wisdom would come out that would be exactly what I was thinking, and you just put your...
That's what I was thinking when you were reading. I'm going,
Yeah.
she's all my points. She's hitting them all. From the, I prefer email as opposed to talking on the phone.
You do too?
Because when you're talking or when you're trying to explain something, you don't get the interruption. You can change it, and if you just give yourself permission to be honest, which is what people walk around thinking they're honest all the time, but when you take this course and you realize that, I think what happens is when you're brought up, you tend not to question what you're told as you're brought up, and then you grow and you become an adult, and the world around you isn't like we were told that world is going to be, and automatically you think there's something wrong with you, that you don't fit in, and you pull back. And what transformative writing, what it did for me, and I came to it, I think, differently than other people, because I volunteered at a senior center. They were offering the course. They'd asked me if I would facilitate, take the training to facilitate. And it was, I just remember sitting there thinking, I can't do this. I'm not smart enough to do this. These people have it way over me. I have nothing to add. I have nothing to contribute. I think I went to you in tears at the end going, I don't think this is for me. And you said to me, but you're so wise. You talk from the heart. And it was, no one ever said that to me before. And I started writing, and as I'm sitting here listening, I find that when I try to work things out, when I'm very, very stressed, I write. And it amazes me that when I'm finished and I read it, I don't even remember writing it. It's like something overtakes you, and the honesty that I'm confronted with really started with you saying, give yourself permission. And I'll never forget those words, give yourself permission to write. It's okay. Whatever you feel is okay. And that, after a while, gave me the freedom to do it, and it was transformative for me, because although I always thought I led this honest life, and some people say I'm too blunt because I say exactly what I feel, because what's the point? I realized that I wasn't being totally honest because I was afraid, and I was ruled by fear. And the more we got in transformative writing, they talk about the fear and letting it go, and that you can conquer it, and then hearing other people have the same trepidation. We're having the same fears. We're no different than I am. Common denominator. Didn't matter if they had a university degree and I didn't, because we're all there for the same reason. And that's what it's all about, is to be listened to be heard, and in some ways to be honored by our story, because everybody's got a story if we take the time to listen. And if we listen, then more people will tell the story. And there's nothing more fascinating than other people's stories. So that's one of the things I got from this was it opened my eyes to listen. Like when I listened to you, or I listened to your brother, or any of the seniors at the center, and have helped people write their stories, because it's important that their families know what they've gone through, and they need permission to talk about it too. Especially people of your generation, and everything is private. You don't talk about it. You don't share the story. It amazes me that people, their adult children, don't know what they've gone through, and they tell it to me, and I go, "Oh my gosh! Like, I'm amazed you survived that, all through writing." And they don't even realize how their life has affected other people.
Yes.
I mean, I'm sure that must have happened with you when you started writing and thinking back.
Yes. Yes.
The effects.
The effects, you're absolutely right.
And how you look at them different now that you're writing as opposed to before you were writing.
Yes,
It's clearer now.
yes, yeah, absolutely. And I find writing is very easy. I mean, it pours.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't seem to even be looking for words. They
They
just
just come out.
I almost can't write fast enough for what's coming out of my head.
Absolutely. You know, it was funny, I'd gone to listen to a speaker a couple of weeks ago, Tom Denton, and he's a fabulous speaker. And I'm like, okay, this is really great. And then someone from his church said, "I understand you went to hear him. Could you please write about it?" And I'm thinking, what the heck? I can't write anything about it. First of all, I don't remember the statistics he used. Anyways, I did end up writing. I actually felt good about what I wrote. For the first time, I think I was like, oh, this actually sounds good. But I wanted to read it to someone else because my fear was I wasn't doing Tom Denton justice. And so I read it to a couple friends, and all I got was, who knew you could write? I didn't know you had that talent, and you made me feel like he opened a whole new world to you. I said, but he did. I never looked at it the way he explained it, and that was fascinating to me. So they said, well, it came out in your writing. And I remember you used to say that to me, that the experience was there and people could understand and relate. And I always thought if I wrote, everyone's going to go, okay, lock her up. Like, there is something seriously wrong with this woman. So to be able to speak freely, and I've always said to you, when we have these little groups like this, it invigorates me. And then I walk away and I go, well, what's missing from my life? And it's this. So it's like every time I say I'm going to do something about it, I'm going to get a writing group together, and I haven't done it, now it's kind of like, well, we'll have this on the internet, so I think I can do that and get more involved and get a group going now. So it what's the word, stimulates me. It's kind of like, okay, let's go. How fast can we do this? When are we doing that? Like, I want to, yeah. And that's what it was like when I took the course too, though. It was, I wanted to do it again and again, because every time you take it, you get something more out of it. And you look at it differently, and it's fascinating how that works. It really, it blows my mind, the freedom you get from it. And it is freedom.
You both raised a really important part about capturing your stories too, to holding your stories and putting them down is so important. I did some life writing stories. Well, they were just life stories. I called them at Deer Lodge Hospital. I was a volunteer and took stories from people who were there and made little books for them.
Fascinating.
And it was just very informal and just share your story. And I was really literally just describe in their own words whatever they said. And I would get calls later, although it was all done through privacy issues, etc. At the end, they would contact the volunteer coordinator who would let the families have my name, so that they could thank me very much, because after the person had passed, they knew things about their parents and their life that they had never known.
Oh,
So just to have that, and I think capturing your stories is a very important part of this whole process as well.
yes.
I know for me, when you mentioned that, my mom and dad, the last year of their lives, they were in a personal care home in Michigan, and on Sunday night, I would call. Same time, Sunday night, my dad would always act so surprised. Peg, it's Joey! Then I would have a trigger, as you've said, Ruth. If I just asked, tell me a story, they'd say, well, can't think of anything. But if I had something specific, then, and I can remember one night saying to my mom, Mom, tell me about your kitchen when you were, she said, when I was growing up, I look around your kitchen, it's probably just the same. I said, well, did you have a microwave? Oh, no, she said, but we had a wood stove. And I said, I didn't know that. Tell me about the wood stove. And she described it, and she described how her brothers had to cut the wood and bring it in for the wood stove. And she then talked about the times her sister and she played Old Maid. They weren't allowed to play cards, but they were allowed to play Old Maid. And they had a deck of Old Maid cards, and they would put a rug behind the wood stove when it was cold and play Old Maid back there. And many stories began to just pour out. Like you were saying, Ruth, the stories, really, they live inside of us. They're waiting. They're holding their number, waiting their turn, and they just would pour out. So I would write what my mom and dad said, type it, and then I would email it to a friend in Michigan who would take it to them in the personal care home that week, read it to them. If they had any edits, they'd make the changes, and then she gave it to the people who were in charge of the newsletter for that personal care facility. So their stories appeared in the newsletter, and others, the staff and others, would get to know them, and some of the family members of visiting would come and say, oh, we loved your story about this or that. So it was a gift I could give them, even though I was so far away that I really couldn't do anything in person. And this book that came out that year, I put the stories that they told me into this book, and so it was a record for the grandchildren that they haven't met, or the great-grandchildren that won't know them except for the stories. And I think how much I would love to have my great-grandmother's stories, to have a little snapshot to look into her life and to know that's what she played Old Maid behind the wood stove with her sister. Anyway, those are when you're saying that, it is yes, we know. And I think you were helping someone who had never told stories from some days in very, very dark
from the
circumstances.
Holocaust,
From
writing her story.
And when I wonder if my grandchildren at the ages of 9 and 11 have any idea what the Holocaust is, and they're Jewish, and so I can imagine the very family members.
Yes.
And the descendants of the person you were helping to write of her Holocaust experiences.
It was, and I keep thinking, it was very difficult for me to write it, and it's still not complete because I have no frame of reference. When I think about, and I remember the first line of the book that's not finished was, if this were a movie, I'd know the opening scene. And it's this little 3-year-old girl sitting in an empty sort of wooden shack playing with a doll made from rags, because that's what I remember her telling me. And the family would be out on the farm and she'd be there all by herself, and how they slept in these sort of like clay oven type things, and so different from what I have. And I always walked around thinking, look at all these entitled people that live in this city, but realize after talking to her, I'm entitled. I don't think twice. And listening to Tom, when you go, all the things we go without. Someone was complaining their water got shut off for an afternoon. And I thought, for an afternoon, some people have to walk miles to get clean water. And we're complaining, and it made me value and respect more of what I have and honor it. Because if we don't honor and aren't grateful for what we have, why should we be given anything more? And we don't always know what we need. We always think it's material things, but it's not. This is what we need. The communication between people and sharing of ideas and thoughts and feelings and belonging. because there's so much distracting us and making us separate when our differences should bring us together, and writing allows that, to honor our differences. And that was a huge lesson. And no judgment. That's what I like about this.
Yeah.
No judgment. Like you always say,
Yeah.
no red pen. And it's true,
Yeah,
right? Like,
it's very helpful to